I am a very visual person. Like when I read books, I can see it playing out in my head like a movie. Um, and in fact, when I learned that some people couldn't, I was like, "What?" I could not believe that. Like some people genuinely just see the words on the page. And for me, it's like I'm extremely visual. And so right down to the facial expressions, I can see that in my head, and sometimes as I'm writing, like, I'll make those facial expressions. I was very much a drama kid growing up, and so it helps a lot with, like, figuring out how characters react to one another and thinking about, like, "Okay, if I were, like, in a scene doing this with a person, how would I react to this?" And so a lot of times I'll act some things out, and even with, like, fight scenes, I had these little sword bookmarks that I would literally, like, use to help try and, like, visualize a fight scene, and I had this one YouTube video that I would watch religiously, which was just hand-to-hand combat, and I would slow it down to, like, point 0.3 speed and watch their movements as closely as possible so I could try and translate it onto the page. I immediately knew that I wanted her to be in the slums, but I also didn't want her to always be that way. Like, obviously, something tragic happened to her father, and then she was kind of thrown onto the street and was like, "Oh my god, I need to survive." And I really knew I wanted her to have that almost like grittiness to her, like, and I really wanted the reader to be able to visualize these slums and that it's not always horrible also. Like the people in the slums are sometimes the happiest of all of them because they are just living their life how they want to. And so I really wanted to show that, but I think Peyton in general, her psychic ability was so fun and stressful to write at the same time because it actually reminds me a lot, and I compare her to, I don't know if you've seen the show Psych. Um, I remember watching that with my sister, and when I had the idea of Peyton pretending to be a psychic, I was like, "Oh my god, it reminds me of Psych." And so I remember how in Psych, he would, like, use context clues and use, pieces of information and visuals and things like that, and so I kind of tried to use that same format for Peyton of, like, okay, there's a tan line on his finger, he used to be married, or there's sand on his boots, what does that mean? And again, I was 18, so and I'm not good with, like, riddles and, like, these big, like, mind, puzzles, and so trying to come up with that was so difficult. Sometimes I would spend, like, the whole day I'd be at work, and it was all I was thinking about was, like, how can I draw a connection? How is like, I knew what she needed to figure out, but I didn't know how to get there. So it was like, okay, if she needs to figure out that he sent someone to the Scorches, how do we get from point A to point B? And so I would just run through in my mind like multiple different visuals she could see and how she would connect those, which was so fun once it finally clicked, but very stressful because I was like, I don't think I'm smart enough for this. Obviously, we all know The Hunger Games and we love it. But The Purging Trials is a little different in that it's not a competition to the death by any means. They're not out there hunting each other. It's more, and again, like The Hunger Games, you can look back on like the Roman Colosseum and like there like art imitates life a lot of the times, which is so funny to think about. But with the Purging Trials, it's very much a showcasing of their power. And obviously, this plague swept through, and a lot of people died, but a lot of people didn't. And they gained these powers, and they wanted to kind of show off a little bit like, look at how strong we are. We survived. And so it's basically um, the higher up young adults in the castle and in the higher stations would get selected to go to these purging trials, but then also there were a few people from the slums that would be selected to kind of as more entertainment than anything. Because as we know, there's a hierarchy. So in the slums, most of the elites there are mundanes, which are lesser ability, they're weaker. And then there's defensive, which is kind of like the next tier, and then offensive. So these purging trials are really just like 3 different games that these young kids have to go through, and it's very much for entertainment, and no one's supposed to die, but sometimes they do. But again, it's just very much like they put them in these scenarios to show their power off, and kind of puff themselves up a little bit. I actually knew as soon as I had the idea for Powerless, I knew it was gonna be a trilogy. And I didn't know how I was gonna get there, like, I didn't have everything planned out. I knew vaguely what I wanted to happen in Reckless, like, I knew that Peyton and Kai need to go on this journey because the end of Powerless, there's a lot of damage that's done. So I knew that needed to happen. I didn't know all the ins and outs, and then Fearless was very much like, "Okay, I gotta wrap everything up and tie it all together," and I knew some aspects of that, but right off the bat, I was like, "This is a trilogy," and then obviously the novellas being tacked on was just really cool to explore different characters in the story. Little less than 3 months of being self-published, SNS directly reached out to me, and it was the UK team, actually. They were like, "We want to pick up your book." So I had a call with them, and immediately after the call, they sent me an offer, and they wanted to purchase the whole trilogy, and I then scrambled to find some sort of attorney to help me figure all this out. I was like, "I don't even have an agent, like, I don't know what to do." So I found this really great attorney, and he helped me through everything, and I got a great deal. I had a joint deal with US and UK Simon& and Schuster, so I work with 2 separate teams, which, to my knowledge, this is one of the only couple times they've ever done that. It's not very normal to have a joint, relationship like that, but it's brought everybody together. I have 2 editors, 2 marketing teams, like, it has been incredible. So, they came to me, and honestly, like I said, I had no intention of querying. Like, I honestly thought I was gonna self-publish the rest of the series. Like, that was the plan, but obviously SNS could bring so much more to the table, and even now when I look back on that, I'm like, I can't imagine doing all of that again. It was so much work as me. Like, me I think I was 19 at the time. I was like, I had no idea what I was doing. It was so exciting because obviously the name Powerless has some negative connotations. Like, the first thing you think about is like, "Oh, powerless, that's not a good name." But I love that this book almost takes back that name and gives it a new meaning. Like, once you finish Powerless, you realize that it's not all that it seems. Like, yes, she lacks power, but she's not powerless, you know? And so you can see that heading into Reckless, and it was so fun to watch her kind of come into herself a little bit more and discover her own strength. Even if she didn't have powers, she was a strong person just in general. And one thing I really loved showcasing was the fact that she knows when she needs help, and I think that is such, like, a key part of being a strong person is knowing when you can't do it on your own. Like, even if you don't want to ask for help, it takes a lot of strength too, and I think we see that in Reckless, towards the end when she kinda has, like, a meltdown in this cave with Kai, and it's like she knows she needs his help, and I loved showing their dynamic, and it was a lot more emotional. It was very character driven, because the 2 of them had a lot of damage to work through in that book, and then leading into Fearless, it really I go even more into showing how powerful she truly has become, and not only does the reader see it, but now the other characters are starting to see that, and they're starting to say, "Wow, like, she doesn't have powers, but she's keeping up with the rest of us." So, that's just been so, so fun. And this is, like, the lamest piece of advice, but genuinely, to make sure that what you're writing is what you are genuinely passionate about and what you want to write, which seems like a no-brainer, but I think nowadays, again, like, romantasy is so in right now, it is so hot and, like, present that it can be tempting to kind of just appease your audience by writing a certain type of trope or a certain type of dynamic, things like that, and it's funny because when I look back on Powerless, it seems so, like, marketed. Like, it seems like it was, like, built to be sold, like, just to sell copies, when in reality, it was just the book I wanted to write, like, truthfully, and I that's why there's so many tropes in there and why there's so much romance is because I had just compiled everything I loved. So I think that's so important because if you write something that you aren't passionate about, it's stuck with you for the rest of your life, and you have to keep promoting that book forever and ever, and to be sick of it would be just, like, so horrible. So I think that's really important is to make sure that this is a story that you personally love. But also, I think At the end of the day, it's the author that is the variable. It's the author that makes each story different. And Romantasy, what people love about it is that it truly is escapism. And they know what they want. The readers want X, Y, and Z trope. They want this relationship dynamic and they want action. So it is kind of hard to stray far from that when you're in this romantasy genre because it's there for a reason. People want the escapism. But I think the truth of it is that the author is the difference. You know, the way that they write, the way that they tell the story is the variable, and also just making it as unique as possible with your characters, and their dynamics, and I love writing mundane moments into fantasy books. That's, like, one of my favorite things is to have them like, in Powerless, they're having a thumb war in one of the scenes, and I just love that it's, like, something we would do in this world, and Kai is very in Reckless, he's so unsure of himself, like, he has never been so, like, split in 2 because on one hand, he has, sworn himself to his brother and he loves his brother, but Kit's kind of having like a meltdown at the moment. But then on the other hand, he's like in love with Peyton still. So it really makes for this cat and mouse, like forbidden love with close proximity, type vibe. And Kit, there are so many girlies that hate Kit. And it makes me a little sad because I get it. I do get it. And I think they dislike him because he takes away from Kai and Peyton. And they're just like, oh, Kit, go away. But I don't actually believe that Kit is the villain. Um, I think he is what he was made to be, and he can be painted in that light, and I guess in some ways he could be seen as the villain, but he's also just a kid that was, like, thrown into this role as a ruler, and he just lost his father, and in Fearless, you find there's a lot more to the story that he also discovers, and so he's bitter, and there's a lot happening. So, honestly, I feel like the biggest antagonist in the story is the elite's own arrogance is truly at the end of the day, like, that is the biggest bad guy, and the fact that these elites can't get over themselves, and they can't welcome the ordinaries back into the kingdom, like, I think at the end of the day, that's what it is, even though Kit can be painted in a bad light, but I'm sorry, Kai is just, like, so torn between his brother and Peyton, like, throughout the whole book. With Powerless, it was very a balance between fantasy and romance. There was a lot of romance, but there was also a lot of action, and then in Reckless, it was heavy on the romance. It was a lot of, like, repairing that relationship between Peyton and Kai, which they needed to do in order to step into Fearless. So now, this one is very much it leans more fantasy, and which is so fun for me because the stakes are so high. We kind of revert back to the the high stakes of, like, the trials that are in Powerless, and we see that again in Fearless, and so it was really fun. It's almost like a full circle moment. Fearless resembles Powerless in a lot of ways, but obviously with a different dynamic of, Peyton being potentially engaged, like, things like that. And obviously there's more of a rift that gets drawn between Kit and Kai because of this, because Kai is in love with Peyton and Kit is obviously potentially gonna be with her. So, lot more high stakes, higher tensions, like, lots of action, and we also by the time the series is over, we will have journeyed to every point on the map, which is really, really cool. So I got to play around with a lot of new, like, settings and kingdoms and people.